How's it going, everybody? And welcome to episode 219 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode is with a returning guest, but it's an exciting episode because I'm talking to TJ Maher from Patthana Garden. And TJ has just brought out his first book, Grounded in the Garden. And for any of you who haven't got your hands on it yet, it is without a doubt one of the most beautiful gardening books I've seen. The photography in it, which is done by Jason Ingram and Clive Nichols, is photographs from the garden, but the color in them is phenomenal, and that's one of TJ's strong points. The book itself is described as an artist's guide into creating a beautiful garden in harmony with nature. So it's a beautiful book. One of the most beautiful gardening books I've seen in terms of the photography inside in it. But there's also really good tips in it, even though it's not set out to be a book of tips. There's some really good tips in it, some nice tree recommendations for small gardens and so on. So it's a lovely, lovely book, and delighted to have TJ on to tell us all about it. So TJ, you're very welcome to Master My Garden podcast.
Thank you very much, John.
We spoke before, as I said. It's a long time ago on the podcast. It was back in episode 25. I'm pretty sure it was the first or second open garden that I actually covered. And there has been a bit of change since then in the garden.
Yeah. Um, I'm not sure if we had the new garden open at that stage. Did it be the new Torque garden? I think.
No, the concept was there, and I
Oh,
think
was
the
it? Okay.
initial kind of outline was there. The digger actually could have been in place at the time, so it was in that very initial stages,
Yeah, it was.
and it has come on a long way since then.
It's come a long way. It's 3 years old now, actually. And actually, we're looking at it yesterday, and it holds its own with the garden that we've had here for 26 years. They kind of look the same at this stage. It's
Right.
amazing what you can do in 3 years and how quickly plants grow, trees and shrubs, how quickly they grow.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I haven't actually been physically in your new garden yet. I was in the first garden, or the main garden. But the pictures are phenomenal, and obviously I see you online posting about it as well. But the one thing that struck me the day I was there was your use of color is phenomenal. The matching of different colors, the blending of different colors through the garden, even using really vibrant colors, but a lot of them seem to, how would you put it? They don't hit you in the face. They're really gently lead you through the garden. So you definitely have an eye for color, and I know that's one of your major themes.
Yeah, well, I'm a painter, of course, an artist. So I've always, all my life I've been dealing with color. So to bring that into the garden it's a very easy transition for me.
Yeah.
It is about color at the end of the day when you're using plants and putting them together. It's a conversation about color, one color against another. So that was very easy for me. I suppose, people talk about how I use color here all the time, and I'm not particularly, um, I suppose I don't really focus on that I use color, but of course I am, you know?
Yeah. So it's natural for you, I guess.
It's
And
natural. Yeah, it
yeah,
is.
and that's I guess what I was trying to say. That when you're there and you see these bright colors, they're still also very natural. So sometimes you can see these, really vibrant flowers, and sometimes they can stand out like a blaze. But
Okay.
yours always looks like it's supposed to be there, like it has always been there, if that makes sense. So very natural use of color, I would say.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'm careful how I use color, of course. So even strong colors, I'm careful how I place them against each other so they don't come across as supposed being garish together, which strong colors can. If you use primaries against each other, if you use red and yellow, for example, two primaries, and you put them side by side, they can be very garish and loud, you know?
yeah.
So I'm very careful how I use color. And then, of course, I use color in very subtle ways as well. And I love that you have to look very closely at the planting, and it kind of reveals the nuances of color through different plants. And I like that because it makes you engage with the planting more.
So you're talking about underplanting here, or little surprises. Is that what you're talking about there when you're saying?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, from a distance, some colors are going to pop, but then on closer revelation, you realize that maybe what appeared to be just three or four different plants, it could be six or seven, because it might
Yes.
be one of something very like it, you know. But to me, that just makes I suppose, the planting more complex
Hmm.
and engaging as well, because you have to stop in and look at the planting very closely, as opposed to just walk by because you think you've seen it and first glance. you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you talk about colors, just to go back to it, so it's quite natural for you because, well, I suppose you have the artist eye, and you know you're used to working with colors, and you're able to blend them and make them seem natural. But in your book on page 25, you mentioned the artist wheel, and that's something obviously I've seen before, but I've never seen it in the context of a garden, which is really interesting. But I think it could be useful for people. So for us who aren't as, you know, good with color as you are, there's often times where we pick something that looks nice, and we stand it beside and plant it beside something else that looks nice, but when the two of them are put together, they don't look so good. But that artist's wheel and how you described your planting in relation to that, could you just tell us a little bit about that again? Because that really is a good way for somebody who doesn't have that eye that you have to be able to maybe mix and match different color plants, different color flowers, and get them to work well.
Hmm. I mean, when I teach here, I always recommend to the students to buy themselves a color wheel, because it's just a fantastic tool just to look at how colors sit together side by side. So, no, like, you know, any color that sits side by side in the color wheel is going to look right in the garden. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
If it's right on the color wheel beside whatever color it's beside, that's going to translate to the garden and it's going to look beautiful in the garden.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can go opposite then on the color wheel. So, like blue and orange, for example, will be opposite each other on the wheel. So they're known as complementary colors or clashing colors. And I use colors like that as well in the garden. I deliberately use a pop of orange to kind of show the blueness of blue.
Okay.
So in a creative way. So they're kind of, you know, that's not necessarily easy planting to look at, because it's quite, you know, I suppose clashing really. So complementary colors, using them like that, like purple against yellow, red and green. But you know, using colors beside each other on the wheel, they just automatically look right together.
Yeah.
So it's just a very useful tool for people if they're not confident with color. And I suppose it surprises me, John, that many people are not confident using color.
Yeah.
You know, they're not confident using color, especially using bolder colors, where you're deliberately pitching them against each other. Pastels, of course, appeal to everybody because they're very, very easy to use.
Yeah.
You know, pastels, everybody loves pastels, and they're beautiful. And of course, they're beautiful because, like, what they have in common is they have white in common. So white through any color will give you a pastel version of that color because that is diluted with white. So when you put that to any color, you're bringing down, I suppose, the strength of those colors. So then they automatically look nice together because they're all soft versions. They have
Yeah.
white in common.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's a fascinating topic, color. I mean, I'm obsessed with color and fascinated by color, and how
Yeah.
our mood as well, of course, how we use it in the home, in the workplace, you know, all of that. If you think of you know, fast food restaurants like McDonald's and everything, you see their furniture is red and yellow, and you know, two primaries actually don't go together, and they'll actually make you feel uncomfortable. You know, there's nothing settling about it, or so. But of course, it's fast food. They want you in and they want you out. They don't want you getting too cozy. You know,
uh,
and that's just a simple example how I suppose industry and um, can use color.
I,
You know.
I I actually might have heard that somewhere before, but that's brilliant. So that's the idea of those colors, that you're
Yeah,
not going to get too comfortable. You're going to eat your food. You're going to be gone. You're
that's
going
it.
to
Yeah,
free up
those
the
white,
space for
yellow
someone.
chairs and that red, they're just two primaries absolutely clashing off each other. You know.
Yeah, brilliant. And you're saying in relation to the color wheels, so you recommend anyone that does your course, and we've mentioned your course a couple of times on Christmas gifts for gardeners. Um, so once colors are beside one another on the wheel, they're generally compatible, and you're occasionally using opposites to make one pop. So I guess what you're trying to do then, you know, in terms of color and to so that people can sort of start to use this themselves, you're generally, as much as possible, trying to work with colors that are beside one another on the wheel. But then occasionally through a bed, you're looking to create these clashes that draw your eye to something. Is that the kind of concept?
Yeah, it would be. So, for example, I don't call it yellow border, but I have plants that are, I suppose, they're based in the yellow palette. But then I will bring them. I won't use red at all in that border because that's two primary colors. But what I will do is I'll go towards red as a color. So I'll introduce all the orange variations. Like when you mix, like as a painter mixing yellow paint with red paint, you're getting orange.
Mm-hmm.
When you mix yellow back into orange, you're getting yellowy oranges. So I'm kind of warming up the yellows by introducing red, but I'm getting all my oranges. But I won't necessarily actually bring red into the planting.
Brilliant, yeah. So
I could actually put a little pop of blues through that to pop against the orange if I wanted to. If I wanted a little bit of pop through it.
And speaking about color in the garden, and as I said, the pictures, the photography are obviously from the garden, and the color is phenomenal. As I said, probably the most beautiful gardening book I've looked at. So it really is. And year to year, so obviously the garden changes a lot during the year. So you're going through your different plants at the moment. I'm sure if this rain ever stops, you're hoping to get your first real big push of color with your tulips, and then you're moving into your summer color and so on. But from one year to the next, are you choosing different color teams? Is there areas that you're completely changing on a yearly basis? Or are you working predominantly with the same borders and just adding different things in?
I vary a little every year. Of course, the new Torque garden is only 3 years old, so that's kind of brand new to me, how I'm using color in that.
Mm-hmm.
And initially, I was going to actually make that garden a yellow garden.
Right.
I just love the idea of a yellow garden, and people are terrified of yellow.
Yeah.
I love that. And there's so many opportunities in planting in yellow. There's so many plants coming, different kind of shades of yellow. And of course, you get into autumn, then you've the autumn color, which is all oranges and russets and browns and golds. It would be a gorgeous thing. But then I like too many plants, so all kind of colors come into it. So I kind of keep all my yellows then in kind of one side of the planting. And then the other side is all kind of pinks and purples and more blues and
Yeah.
So and then the inner garden is probably richer colors because I'm using more, I suppose, more tropical planting as well and more tender planting. So I'm kind of using hotter colors in there.
Mm-hmm. And year to year, you're doing minor edits, but you're working with the general plants that are there, and you're adding in a certain type of, for example, cosmos or annual stuff to bring that difference every year.
Yeah, I mean, every year I like to grow something different every year. So it's the excitement of growing something different. So I grow my Cosmos Dazzler I really like. Of course, it's that lovely cerise pink. But then I'll use that where I think it's going to look right in the planting. So it wouldn't be planted in the same place every year. I dig up all my plants in the autumn and I rejig them completely. I suppose
you do?
painting as well, just make it a different composition of color and form and shapes and textures. So it changes all of the time in that sense. So the borders are never the same.
Never the same.
So,
and I'm pretty sure back in our original episode, it was yourself, and it's something that has always stuck in my head, where you were speaking about the garden, and what you said was that you make edits to the garden, almost like an artist or a writer. You're making an edit here, minor tweaks, minor changes. And then I saw those words referencing the book, an autumn edit on the garden. So that's essentially what you're doing. You're working with the same plants and possibly rejigging them around.
yeah, and new plants all the time, of course. But I am in the autumn. I call it editing. I suppose preparing for the following year as well, taking out stuff that hasn't worked or putting in more stuff that did work. But then throughout the year, I'll actually edit as well. I mean, if a plant gets too tall, for example, I might just cut it down by half, even if it means losing the color itself. If it's just the shapes are wrong, or it's getting it to work, I suppose, as a composition all of the time. So I'm liable to just cut a plant in half, or especially if the color is wrong, John. When you're kind of imagining in the spring you're planting, you think, oh, I think that'll look right with that. But then maybe in reality, sometimes just the color just don't quite go together. They're just kind of just not sitting right together. What I'll do then is I'll actually I'll take all the flowers, cut all the flowers off completely of the plant that's just not looking right.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you have to be brave to do that.
Yeah.
You're bursting a plant from a seed, and then it suddenly comes into flower in August, right? And you realize actually it's not really working the way I thought it would. It takes a bit of bravery to cut all the flowers off or dig the plant out. But
Yeah,
actually,
so you have to be
by
brave and
doing it,
ruthless.
yeah, you have to be ruthless.
Yeah,
But by doing that, you're leaving the rest of the composition, and that's pulling together. The rest of it will pull together.
yeah,
I
yeah,
find myself sometimes, John, in the garden, especially years ago, less so now. I'm much more ruthless because we're open to the public and everything. But I'd be kind of nearly waiting for a plant to finish flowering, and the minute I know that I'm wanting it to finish flowering, then I know it's wrong. It's not working. So
yeah.
I'm waiting for it to finish. So now, like, life's too short. I can't wait to just chop it off and enjoy what's left. You know,
Um,
and that's what
so
it's about. I suppose that's the creative part of gardening.
yeah,
Well.
and that's something I guess, that a lot of people listening who are home gardeners don't have open gardens, and they're not. Some of them don't have the flair for the color that you have, but they're also, I suppose, getting their plants, propagating them or buying them, and they're putting them in, and they're kind of stuck to that once it goes in, and they're afraid to move it, or they don't want to move it, or I bought it, but if
Yeah.
it's not working, take it out. That's kind of your philosophy on it.
Absolutely. And I know from the students here, I mean, people plant they plant something in the garden or they inherit a plant and they're terrified to touch it, even
Yeah,
if they don't like it.
yeah,
So that's what that's about, actually. I'm absolutely ruthless. Anything could get the chop here. Or we dug up, like
so
this morning, for example, I dug up salvias that got through the winter. And I was thinking, well, leave them or take them out. But they got very old and woody. And I just thought, no, I would just pull them up and start with a younger plant. It'll look better.
yeah,
So yeah, you have to just make these decisions all of the time. And
yeah,
imagining all the time what it's going to look like in a few months' time.
hmm,
That's really, I suppose, the creative part. You're constantly thinking ahead. So when this plant goes over, what's going to take its place?
hmm,
An area in the garden looks lovely in April. That's very nice. But what's it going to look like in August and September, the same area? So
yeah.
that's important for me that I'm thinking all of the time like that. So there's a plant in the background ready to take its place or planted very close by.
Yeah, and that's something we should all be striving for, in our home gardens, is that uh, I often mention on the podcast where if somebody has built a new bed and they've gone to their local garden centre or nursery and they've picked up all their plants, you could nearly know by the plants that are
Yeah.
planted in that bed what month it was planted in,
But yeah,
because
yeah,
they've gone in on that day and everything has looked great and we've filled the bed and it looks brilliant. But
yeah,
there's the kind of, you need to think of it long term, as you said, right? This is going to be stopped flowering in 6 weeks' time. What's coming behind that? And
exactly.
then what's coming behind that again?
Exactly. And especially in a smaller garden, or, a lot of people have small gardens now, that the small space works for as long as possible, as
Yeah.
long as possible. And that's something, I was very conscious of before we got the new Torque garden. Like the inner garden here is a small little garden on a third of an acre. So I suppose I got into plants, specific plants that just flower for a very, very long time. So sterile plants come into that as well, of
Mhm.
course. And then I brought all of that next door. I have listed that in the book, list of plants like that, plants that I would kind of lean towards or go to, to give me impact for the greatest amount of time.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that I remember, and I see the pictures in the book again, reminding me of it. One of the most fascinating things is your pot display
Oh,
in the inner garden. It always looks brilliant, and a bit like what you're talking about there earlier on, where you can get a surprise, something draws you to a color, draws you to an area, you go have a look, but when you get there, there's three different plants of the same color. It's the same with your pot display. Your pot display is really clever, and I forget what month I was there in, but there was great color anyway. And I see the pictures in the book. Again, they're different plants from what I remember, but the impact is the same. So you're using kind of staging of different size pots, lots of different planting, and it looks really good as well. So what's your kind of philosophy there? Obviously, you're staging with different sizes, but you obviously have a longer term plan to have that display looking good all year round.
yeah, I mean, different size pots, different size plants. Because we start here now with the tulips, they're just about to pop. Because when they're gone over, I'll throw away those tulips actually, and just start introducing summer color, and that'll go right the way into autumn. I mean, any plant is a candidate for a pot, really. So anything could turn up in my pot display,
Yeah.
depending on what I find in the nursery or whatever it is that I grow too many of or grow something deliberately for. I mean, anything could be in the pot display. But I suppose, John, as well, I mean, a pot display really, it's like a border when you put all those pots together. It's the same thing as creating a border, all the different composition of color and shape and form and all of that. It's the same thing, except each plant is in its own little pot.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose the beauty of that is that much easier than in the border. If something isn't quite working where it is, you can take away the pot of whatever color it is, and maybe even move it over into the pot display in another section where it works better, or take it out completely and take a few of them out and create a whole new composition of color somewhere else, or take the pot out and introduce them into the borders. So there's great flexibility in using pots like that, and I've people like them here, so I kind of continue it.
Yeah.
They're a lot of work, I have to say, though. Pots are a lot of work.
They're a lot of work. They're probably essential though, in a small garden to give you that flexibility of having color for a long period of time.
Yeah, and especially, I suppose, especially when we have hard landscaping outside your back door, where maybe it's patios or whatever it is. There's often not a lot of opportunities to plant,
Yeah.
especially in small town gardens. There's often a lot of concrete or a lot of everything. So they are a lovely opportunity to introduce color very close to the house by the doors and everything. So that's lovely. And then stage them, you can tier them, and of course take the pot away as it goes over and introduce a different pot. So this pot in the background really take its place, and
Yeah,
it's a nice way to garden.
yeah, for sure. The book then. So you mentioned before we started recording that you always wanted to have a book. So tell us about that's the origin of it. The garden then is the inspiration for it. So tell us about the book. Tough process. I hear a lot of people saying write the book. So tell us about it. The idea.
It was an unusual process for me because I'm not used to putting words together or even technical on a computer. So like it was literally like learning something completely new for me. But it was a lovely process. I really, really enjoyed it. For years, people used to say to me, because of Facebook and Instagram, my photographs, you should really make a book or a calendar or something.
Yeah.
So I had the idea that it would be lovely to bring those photographs together. And as well as, of course, I wanted to write about gardening, what I know, and share all of that. But more than that, I wanted to share, I suppose, how I felt personally in the garden through my musings, which are more spiritual musings.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also wanted to share my love of nature. That was a big driving force, I have to say, for writing this book.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just thought before I leave this planet, I want to just show people the beauty of nature, and that's like the environment is in huge trouble at the moment, and I find that very, very distressing, I have to say, compared to the landscape that I would have grown up in as a child or a teenager.
Yeah.
I find it very distressing to look at our landscape and see how it's treated at the moment. So I just wanted to, I suppose, show the beauty of creatures and plants to people and speak up for the environment and get them to see that it's in trouble. And then, of course, as gardeners, what can we do? We have a role to play in that.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
Another driving force in writing the book. And then, as I said as well, to write personally, and my kind of, I suppose, like spiritual reflections, really, of, I suppose, I'm very connected to nature.
Yeah.
I've always been very deeply connected to nature and just watching it, and just what I have learned personally from just watching that and how I bring that into my own life.
Yeah. And you mentioned, it says an artist's guide to creating a beautiful garden in harmony with nature. And within your own garden, like what does that mean in terms of how you create into harmony with nature? I see in your book, there's lots of beautiful photographs, of the butterflies. I remember while I was there was a robin close by who apparently was, sort of a regular to where we were sitting that evening. So there's harmony there. So tell us about that and what that means to you.
I suppose it means that I'm gardening with, I suppose, mindfulness or consciousness of how I'm affecting the garden in whatever I do, So even, we don't use chemicals here. So, but if I was to, like, I know the effects of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
So it's
I
a
remember,
consciousness.
I remember once years ago, like many years ago, um, using slug pellets. I got desperate in a winter
Mhm.
like the one we've just had. The slugs have been having a lovely time.
Yeah,
And I just sprinkled some around in certain areas, you know. And then the following year, we had no frogs in the pond,
right.
no frogs. And I suppose in a very simple way, it just showed me the effect that everything is connected. You
Mhm,
can't you can't do one thing without a consequence. There's consequences to everything.
mhm.
So whether I use slug pellets or I don't use them or whatever I do in the garden has a consequence. And I suppose then being conscious that everything that I do, because it has consequence, that I tread lightly in the garden, aware that, you know, this is home to so many creatures. And I get to live in the house and go shopping and, you know, bring shopping in from outside. But the creatures who rear their young here and they live, we have a jackdaw here. And they all look the same, jackdaws and crows. You think they're all flying around the landscape all the time. But we have one here with white feathers. We call him Splash.
Right.
But the exact same spot sitting in the corner of the house every morning. And he only goes around the garden, the field next door, and the village green opposite. So he, you know, if he didn't have those little splashes of white, I just think he's just a crow that has passed by or something.
Yeah.
But he lives here. This is his home. So I'm very conscious that, you know, whatever I do is going to affect these creatures, whether I spray for green fly or not, or
Hmm.
there's a knock-on effect of everything. And I don't think we hold ourselves responsible, I suppose, really, John, for things we do and the effect that has on the environment. You
Yeah.
know,
And so,
so I feel
so
very strongly for that, looking at the greater landscape at the moment, because it's quite shocking, our Irish landscape, what it looks like.
oh yeah,
You know, compared to
with,
how I grew up, it's quite shocking to look at it.
yeah,
So
without,
growing up now, think it looks normal, but that's not normal to me as growing up as a kid. So that was a real driving force in writing the book as well, just to show the beauty of hedgerows and trees and a little bit of wildness as well. I talk about that in the book, that we really have to come out of this obsession we have with neatness and geometry and our need to control and tidy,
yeah.
and embrace some wildness a little bit and untidiness.
So
We have to.
you're
Because
talking about consciousness, really. You're
Hmm?
talking about being conscious of the actions that you're taking and the knock-on
Absolutely.
effects of that.
Absolutely.
Interestingly, your inner garden and your top garden at the time you had just opened an opening through it when I was there,
Uh,
and that there was a lot of hawthorn in that, I remember. But I see in the pictures now, looking from the meadow back towards the inner garden, across the Torc garden, that you've retained that hawthorn hedge, and I know there was other plants in there as well. But there's one amazing picture of the hawthorn in full flower, and
tulips.
I forget even what the front of it was, but
Yeah, tulips.
there's a brilliant garden scene at the front, but the white thorn caught my
Yeah.
eye really well in that.
Yeah. A few people have commented on that photograph, actually. A lot of people have commented on that photograph.
Yeah,
It's a very simple photograph, but I really wanted to put it in because it's our native hawthorn. It's our
yeah,
native hedgerow that around the country has been chopped and hacked and everything. But a beautiful garden tree.
yeah.
You know,
Oh,
I
for
had somebody in the garden last year, and she asked me, "What's that beautiful tree?" I said, "That's our native hawthorn." I was like, a little bit disappointed to hear that. But these are our native plants, and they're beautiful plants.
Yeah, I want to go off topic.
One thing I wanted to do in the book, show people the beauty of our native plants and not just call them weeds, or, as well as talking about color and design and pot displays and all that, was to so bring people back to loving wild plants and wild places.
Yeah, and we'll talk about your meadow in a minute, because I've seen the pictures of it, and that'll be interesting. We'll go take a really step backwards here and go on a bit of a tangent. You mentioned about your jackdaw with the white stripes on it.
Yeah.
This week, so where I live, just about 100 meters away, there's a big grove of trees on my neighbor's farm, and there is a huge amount of crows in there. Uh, but and I've noticed it before, but I've particularly noticed it in the last couple of weeks. Crows are just super intelligent. And this is really going on a tangent now, but bear with me for a second. So they're building their nests at the moment, obviously, and there was a bit of a protection going on last week because there was a buzzard hovering around, and a buzzard eats the young crows, which I didn't wasn't aware of until I started researching it, but that's what was going on. The buzzard was circling for this, and the crows worked together to direct him away. And so one flew, he was hovering, one crow flew directly below him, one directly above him. And I mean, this is like something you'd see in a top top of the movie. They were literally on top of one another. And then the others were going at the buzzard and directing them away from the area. And this went on. He made 3 or 4 attempts to come into the area, and they, one after another, attacked him to get him out of there. So really working in a team. But the other thing that they were doing is, I cut my beech hedges a couple of months ago, and as I cut the top of it, I didn't take the cuttings off. I just leave them on the top of it. But they were working in teams. So one would land on top of the hedge, flick out the beech cutting, and as it lands, like literally it lands for a second, and bang, the next guy is away with it. But they were working in groups of 4 and 5, and constantly just helping one another and working together. And it's amazing to see it.
It is amazing to see it. And it's teamwork, you know. But even talking about my Jack here, we call him Splash with the splashes of white. But he's up there and he has his partner sits beside him every morning. I thought, that's a relationship. These are two, you know, that's a relationship. And animals have their relationships like humans do with each other. So like whether it's all those crows and there's a hierarchy, you know, who's boss and all of that, of course they do. So, you know, we forget that with animals. They have emotion, they have feeling, they have all of that, of course. And I say that in the last part of the book, they all have a right to be here by the very fact that they exist, because we share this planet. We're just one species on this planet. So I'm very conscious of that in the garden, and I have to say, it's quite tricky. Like, you know, what do you do with lily beetles then and slugs? What do you do? Like,
and especially at the moment, what do you do with slugs?
well,
Because they have never been as plentiful as they are at the moment.
I went out in the garden the other night. We have a fox here, so I feed him at night. So I was getting a torch to go out and feed him. And I was walking out the lawn. There was hundreds of slugs on the lawn. I thought, oh dear God, you know. And they've eaten all the daffodil flowers this year. There's not a daffodil in the meadow because we have had a very mild winter. There's no frosts, and so they're probably breeding through the winter. So I think we're going to have a slug infested spring. But that's the challenge of gardening as well, of course. These are the challenges.
Yeah, for sure.
How do you garden and not deal with all of these creatures who maybe are damaging our plants? You know, only a small amount of slugs actually damage live plants. Most of them are actually feeding on decaying matter and creating our topsoil. And people forget that, of course.
Yeah. So that's the, gardening in harmony with nature. You mentioned the spiritual side of gardening, and I remember when we spoke the last time, you mentioned the name Patthana and what that means. So maybe just tell us a bit about that, the spiritual side of gardening for you. And you mentioned just a few minutes ago how you feel when you're in the garden. So
yeah, it was another element to the book that I really wanted to introduce. I didn't want to just write another gardening book. I wanted to base it here on the gardens, but it had to be personal to me, I suppose, and how I garden, John, you know, and how I felt in the garden. I just feel like, well, all through my life since I was a kid, I suppose I've always turned to nature when I feel not in trouble, but when I'm searching for something or a deeper access to something in me. I've always gone to nature. It always shows me a different way of being, a different way of thinking, you know? So I was talking, there's a section in the book I talk about embracing our mud in the pond. And I talk about the lotus flower and the water lily. That, the water lily, and it's amazing to watch in the pond coming up out of the water and the dark mud, and it floats on the top, but without that, and it's a beautiful, beautiful flower, but without the mud and everything underneath, there could be no water lily. And I just think, in our own lives, we all have our pasts and we all have things we have to deal with. I mean, everybody I know has stuff going on in their lives. And we can forget that we're still, we can embrace all of that within us, any kind of challenges or whatever we want to call them in our lives. And they're part of us, and embrace that. But it doesn't make us less or anything like that. Maybe we're actually more because of that. And we can wear that. And that's who we are. And our beauty is all of that. It's the sadness, it's the happiness, it's all our past. And that's what makes us beautiful, actually. So I wanted to share that, of course, with people that, life is challenging. It's hard to be It's hard to be a human being, person, and have feeling. It's hard. Um, in social media, the world we live in makes it quite difficult, I think, because people compare themselves and think they should be such and such or whatever.
Mhm.
So, yeah, but I always find that I'm very real when I'm with plants. I just see even the jackdaw, for example, back to the jackdaw again, just how they live their lives together.
Yeah.
Watching I say my splash, watching him live his life, and he's not really caught up in his past or his childhood or whatever, and he's not really worrying about his old age either.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
They
and
live
like
in, they live in the moment, and
live
that's
in
a
the
lovely
moment.
lesson to take that from them, because we get very caught up in our minds worrying about things and stressing about things, and most of the things we worry about, they never come true in the first place. So we
Yeah.
we live a lot in our minds.
Yeah.
That's
I
why I
think
call the garden Patthana.
that's probably, and the modern world is becoming more, and there's more stresses on people and more things to do and more deadlines to meet, more places to be, and all of this. And all of that speed of action, speed of mind, causes all these problems that people have and these feelings that people have. But if you go into the garden or into nature, it doesn't have to be the garden. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're bringing in. You'll leave the same way. So you sort of eventually will settle down into I suppose, the ticking clock of nature, and that'll calm you down. So I'm reading a good book at the moment, non-garden related, and going off on another tangent here. It's Bear Grylls' book,
Oh, okay.
the adventurer. So, and he has a line in it where he's had obviously Barack Obama and all these people out in the wild, but he said the wild and nature is a great equalizer of everybody, and I think it's kind of true, and it's along the lines of what you're saying.
Yeah, I understand that actually. Yeah, it
Yeah,
makes everyone equal.
yeah,
Uh, the ego is taking away. Really, I suppose that's a simple way to say it. The ego is taking away. You're neutral with everything.
yeah,
I
for
just
sure.
feel that in the garden, that I'm just another thing living here. And and I've done that. I've sat in this seat in the garden, all the butterflies, watching everything, and there can be all kind of nonsense going around in my head.
Mhm.
And I suppose that's what I mean, really, how I learn. I suppose all these creatures haven't caught up in that nonsense.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
talk about sparrows as well, about this chirping to be done in one of our
right.
meetings. I said Sparrowhawk comes, and there's a panic for a brief second, but
Yeah,
it's let go of very quickly. They don't hold
yeah,
on to it for until next week.
yeah. They don't worry about it
Stressing
for the
about it.
week. Once
They don't
once once he's gone, that's it. Yeah,
say it, yeah. So I think there's a lot we can learn from animals, especially in nature. Yeah, there's
yeah.
so much we can learn. So yeah, I've woven that into the book as well.
Yeah, brilliant. So it has those elements, obviously the beautiful photography, the spiritual aspect of it, the in harmony with nature aspect of it. And you said you didn't want to write another gardening book, I think were your words. But there's also some very good, useful stuff in it, like I mentioned the color wheel, but also you talk about 10 trees for a small garden, and it's a really good list. If I ever cover an episode on that, I might use some of those.
Okay.
Um, and there's 10 trees and shrubs for autumn color. Again, really good practical ones. So there is a practical element to it as well,
Oh,
which
absolutely.
which really comes true.
Yeah, I mean, the book first and foremost is a practical book. I just didn't want it to be only practical.
Yeah,
So I do have lists of plants for autumn color and stuff, and they're all based here in Patthana Garden.
yeah,
Because then I have a chapter on color, how to use color in the garden. That's a whole chapter. You
brilliant.
know. And then I have pot display chapter, creating borders, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's
Just to make it, I just wanted to be more personal for me, so I introduced, of course, the spiritual, and it's all based here in the garden. So even though I mean, a lot of my own photographs are in it. There's four other photographers in it: Jason Ingram, Clive Nichols, the two English photographers, and then there's two Irish photographers. But all the photographs are from here in the garden, and even Kieran Neary, he's the wildlife photographer. And it was so fussy. Like if you took a photograph, say of a frog, it had to be here in the garden. Even though
yeah,
he did the most gorgeous photograph of a frog. I was like,
yeah,
no, it has to be this week. And nobody would know the difference, of course. But
yeah. But
I wanted it that personalized. It had to be here in the garden. If a butterfly, it had to be the butterfly here in the garden. So he came and did his photo shoots here of some of the wildlife.
Yeah, but of course you have wildlife there. But I think that
Everything is
is
personal to the book. Even the color wheel. It's the color wheel. A friend of mine. I should have painted it, of course, because I'm a painter. I just didn't have time last year to paint a color wheel. So a friend of mine painted it. I didn't want some stock image of anything. Everything is personal to the book.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest with you, I've said it a couple of times, but that definitely comes true. That, you know, the imagery, the photography is phenomenal, and
Yeah.
obviously they're pictures that are taken from the garden, so that means the garden is phenomenal. But you can see the artistry, the color that you're talking about in every photograph, even down to the simple one of the hawthorn in the background, which I had even forgot that it was tulips in the front, but that is a brilliant photograph.
Yeah, because you see
Yeah,
the
for
whole
sure.
part.
So the book is out now, but I know you have other things on the go as well. So the garden was always open on a Sunday, I think from April to September or October, but you've added some days now. So tell us about that.
We're going to open every Friday and Sunday this year.
Brilliant.
So 2 days a week. So that's exciting. So we're going to open on Friday week, whatever date that is, first Friday of April. So every Friday and every Sunday from April to the end of September, from midday to 5 p.m. So we'll welcome the public in and we'll talk about all kind of things, wildlife and weeds and what's not a weed, and get into all kind of things. And just share the beauty of nature with people, pot
Yeah,
displays and wildlife and all of it.
yeah, brilliant. And I'll put the link in the show notes as to where, like, it's Kilteague. What's the address?
It's Kilteague, County Wicklow, yeah.
Kilteague, County Wicklow. So people will find it anyway. And
Patthana Garden, we have a sign outside, but if you Google it, it'll give you the directions and all of
yeah.
that.
And recently you're starting your course quite soon. Is there places left on it?
Yeah, the first class is over, the March class is over. So we're kind of full for this year. So during the summer now, I'll start taking names. Some people coming in will leave their names for next year's course, and,
Yeah.
then I'll
And
reach out to them in November and see if they still want to do the course. Then
yes.
at that stage, I'll fill up the classes for next year.
Yeah. So
The
that's a
full
course
journey
that,
again of everything.
yeah. So that's a course that's taken over 1 month. So from March through to September, October.
March to November, and it's
March.
one class per month. So it's 1 4-hour class every month. And of course, the garden is completely different every month.
Yeah.
With
And
different jobs and different things for me to teach.
yeah, for sure. And so that's in person. And so I'm sure you're covering everything from propagation to,
Absolutely everything.
the mixing of colors and so on. So
Everything that happens here between March and November.
yeah, brilliant. And the book itself, then, where can people find that? I'm sure it's in all the usual places, but
It's in all the main bookshops. It is. It is on Amazon and the online stores as well. And of course, it's here in the garden. I have it here as well.
yeah, brilliant. So signed copies,
I've
I
been
guess.
posting. Say that again, John?
You can get signed copies, I guess, from the garden directly.
I've been posting it out the last few weeks to all over the world. It's been fantastic. Literally all over the world.
Yeah, brilliant. Exciting times.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, as I said at the start, it is one of the most beautiful gardening books I've ever held. It's the photography is phenomenal, and the use of color is phenomenal, and it definitely comes through. So it's yeah, a brilliant book, and people should get their hands on it. So TJ, it's been really great to have you back on the podcast. A few years since our last conversation. Best of luck with the new book, and thank you very much for coming on Master My Garden podcast.
Thank you so much, John. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
So that's been this week's episode. A huge thanks to TJ for coming on. Yeah, as I said, and I'm not just saying it because TJ was on the call, it is a phenomenal book in terms of the photography and the color use in it. And really, you should get a look at it. And definitely, if you can at all, get down to Patthana during this year, or even a couple of times. As he said, from month to month, the garden can be quite different. So it's worth getting down to have a look on a couple of occasions. I'd have to get down myself to see the new Torque garden, or it's not new anymore, but I haven't been in a while, so it'll be new to me. So yeah, a really great chat and a really beautiful book. And that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening. Until the next time, happy gardening.